Hello, welcome to the second of these revision videos for the Living Under Nazi Rule exam. And this video is going to cover chapter 2, which is all about what made it so hard to oppose the Nazis. So this includes both the thought about how the Nazis kind of controlled Germany and also thinks about what opposition there was and perhaps why there wasn't more opposition. The first thought then is about the use of fear. And we use this term, the machinery of terror, to describe and explain how the Nazis created an atmosphere of fear and potential violence. This machinery of terror kept German people scared and made people that may have opposed the Nazis think twice. So, what made up the machinery of terror? First of all, we have the SS as one of the main groups. This group dealt violently with any significant opposition, and they were supported by another group called the SD. Now, the SS is led by Heinrich Himmler, who eventually becomes the kind of leader of the whole machinery of terror. So that includes the SS, the Gestapo, even the German army. And the SD is more of an investigative body. So they are kind of researching, they are finding out what's going on, and they would kind of tell the SS of significant threats. The SS also run the concentration camps and are the ones that kind of do the higher level dirty work. For example, the Night of the Long Knives was led by the SS. It's an elite group, an elite Nazi private army. They are supported by the Gestapo, and the Gestapo are supported by the SS. The Gestapo are like a secret police. So they are behind the idea of spying, of looking into everything the German people are doing. The idea is they are keeping all Germans in line. Now, the desired kind of feeling about the Gestapo was that German people would feel like the Gestapo could be anywhere and were everywhere. They wanted the Nazis to feel like they had control over the whole of Germany. In reality, the Gestapo was never a huge organization. They certainly weren't listening in to every conversation or tapping every phone or opening every letter. But that was the idea they wanted to get into German people's heads. And so to do this, they had block leaders, people in every kind of street or block of flats who would be a reporter for the Gestapo. They would also arrest people and get people arrested for very minor crimes, talking bad about Hitler or the Nazis in a cafe or something. That could get you arrested. And as the stories about people that had been arrested spread around the country, this idea that the Gestapo were everywhere, that you had to be careful what you said wherever you were, whoever you were with, starts to grow across the country. And then we have the creation of concentration camps. So across the time of the Nazis, there's over 1,000 concentration camps are set up. The first one is Dachau. It's good to have an example up your sleeves. Important just to remember that these are different to the extermination camps that are built intentionally to kill people during the Holocaust. These are more like massive prisons where the Nazis can put people that they find difficult, that they don't want in society. So all of these things combined create this atmosphere where German people are just too scared to rebel. This idea of a kind of a culture of fear. So people in Germany are scared. People that may have rebelled don't rebel because the SS might deal with them, the Gestapo might be listening to them, they might get sent to a concentration camp. As part of their machinery of terror, the Nazis tightened their control of the justice system. So this means the courts, the prisons, the police. Through this, the Nazis are able to do three really important things. They're able to arrest opponents easily. They're able also to protect Nazis from being tried as criminals. For example, Nazi guards in concentration camps are protected. Thirdly, they are able to ensure support from police and judges. This happens through, in part, pressure, in part giving things to the police and judges, pay rises, that sort of thing, as well as controlling who could be in the police and who could be a judge. And the Civil Service Act that we learnt about earlier is part of that, controlling who is in these positions of power. And so the Nazis really control all stages of this justice system. They're controlling who is arresting people, they're in control of the law courts and who is convicted, and they're then in control of kind of what happens to people after they're convicted. So this is really important in being able to control who is out there in society. Second main idea then about how Nazis keep total power is propaganda. And this is led, of course, by Joseph Goebbels, and it used a wide range of techniques to indoctrinate and control what Germans knew about what's going on in the country, and also about what they feel. The idea of propaganda is to control both of those things. So this is one of the key questions of this chapter. What's more important in making German people go along with the Nazis? Is it that they're scared, or is it that they're convinced about the Nazis doing good things? And if it's the second thing, then propaganda is very important there. Some of the things the Nazis do in terms of propaganda, and you need to be able to explain why each of these was important. They use posters everywhere. Very simple but powerful visual imagery, very repetitive with the use of colours and the swastika and Hitler with simple slogans. Apparently the Nazis create on average around 125,000 posters every week. So it's a huge production, and these posters are going up everywhere. Wherever you look, you're seeing these messages. And the idea is they're slowly kind of becoming part of your own conscience. We then have the radio, a really powerful tool. In the days before TV or internet, the radio is one of the main sources of information as well as entertainment. And the Nazis know this. Goebbels realizes that using radios can be really powerful for telling German people things, but also making them feel positive and happy about the Nazis. And if everyone has a radio, then everyone is almost forced to listen to Hitler's speeches, for example. So as part of this, not only do they control what's on the radio, but they also produce these very cheap radio sets that we know of as people's receivers. And by 1939, around 70% of German households own one of these radios or another type of radio. So it's a really powerful way of getting inside people's homes and slowly telling people things and getting people to feel certain things. And then we have newspapers as well. Example here, the Der Stürmer newspaper, very famous one, constant anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish messages, constant propaganda, which is pro-Hitler, pro-Nazis, and against anything else. And then the final one we'll touch on in this video are the rallies, these big theatrical events often happen in the summer. The most famous one is at Nuremberg, and these rallies are amazing productions which really kind of play on people's emotions. The Nazis want people to feel things, and these rallies with the constant imagery of the swastika, this kind of excitement, music, lights, like I say, kind of theatre, are meant to be exciting, meant to make people feel good about the Nazis, like they want to be part of this big movement, and also they're ways to kind of show off. So the Nazis use these rallies to show the rearmament of the Nazi military, of the German military, I should say, to show off new kind of weapons and aeroplanes. So they're big celebrations and very effective kind of demonstrations of Nazi power. All of these things are designed to indoctrinate the German people. A really key word here. Indoctrinate, remember, means kind of putting ideas and attitudes in people's minds which they don't question. So people stop thinking, people don't question whether something's true or not. If you're indoctrinated, you just believe everything that you hear. So some people will say, well, German people weren't really indoctrinated, they just kind of went along with things out of fear. Other people would argue, actually, this propaganda is so powerful, and it's everywhere, that over time, German people are indoctrinated. and they just kind of believe stuff, and they have these ideas like Hitler is some kind of savior, and they don't question it anymore. Worth just touching on some of the other goals and tactics and aims of Nazi propaganda. So, under Goebbels, the Nazis want German people to think these things. The Nazis tried to make Hitler appear as the savior of the German people, a hero, almost like a god. So he's on the radio, it's on loudspeakers in towns and workplaces, on the streets, in posters. He's kind of this like a hero, a figure just kind of above other human beings almost. They also try to make people feel like they want to belong to the Nazis. So propaganda is meant to make people feel positive and warm about the Nazis, like it's something that you want to be part of. It also tries to divide German people along a clear line. So the Nazis try and divide people into us, which basically means proud and decent Germans. And if you're not with us, then you are them, you're against us. And the Nazis group all these people together, enemies of Germany, Jews, communists, criminals. And so the propaganda tries to create this very clear option. You're either with us, you're supporting Hitler, you're with the Nazis, or you are part of this kind of evil group of people. And then finally, the Nazis, and they do this very effectively, wants to make people scared of something. So they constantly make people scared of a Jewish takeover or of communists. And this kind of fear that they're able to create kind of makes people want protection. And the Nazis say that Hitler will protect you from these things. Nazis are protecting you from all these things. So making people scared, but also feel warm towards their protector, is a really effective tactic. So look then at how fear and propaganda were really effective in stopping German people from fighting back, from opposing, and really effective in some ways in terms of propaganda in making people support and like the Nazis. We need to think about what opposition there was, though. And just remember that we group this into two phases: the opposition before World War II, so that's up to 1939, and then in a later phase, the later chapter, we'll look at opposition during war. So, for the first 6 years of Nazi rule between 1933 and 1939, we could say that opposition wasn't really effective. It was quite easily crushed. There are three main groups of people that opposed the Nazis at this time. And there's quite a lot of people involved in these three different groups. But this key point, it's not effective. It never manages to really pose a significant threat to the Nazis. And that machinery of terror we talked about earlier is able to crush each of these groups. So we'll start off with what we would call the left. By that we mean the group of political parties, of groups, of people who have very different ideas to the Nazis. So people on the left are predominantly, we'd say, social democrats and communists. So those two groups are the biggest threat. But importantly, they were never united. And this meant that the Gestapo were able to break up their resistance. The Social Democrats, who were the biggest party apart from the Nazis in 1932, and the Communists, they don't trust each other, they don't work together. And because of this, it makes it very hard to oppose such a strong force as the Nazis. Having said that, both those two groups try hard. There are lots of smaller breakout groups amongst the Social Democrats and Communists. They write newspapers, they try and protest, but it's very hard to get out there when the Gestapo and SS and the SD are creating such a tight net of information. So they were probably the biggest threat, but not united and not ultimately effective. Second group, we could talk about the church, the religious groups of Germany. And in terms of opposition, we're predominantly here thinking about different church leaders. Now, there are two main groups of religious people, two main kind of Christian groups. We have the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. Now, when the Nazis come to power, they have to think about how they are going to control this part of German society, which is a really big group of people. With the Catholic Church, the Nazis are able to do a deal known as the Concordat. And in this deal, the Nazis basically say, we'll let you get on and won't interfere with your church, but you need to make sure you let us get on and don't interfere with politics. And this is kind of signed off, agreed, even with the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. That means that resistance and opposition within the Catholic Church is never really vocalized until a bit later on, when some kind of brave leaders and people start to speak out. The main opposition in the church, though, comes from Protestant leaders. And the Nazis were never able to fully control the Protestant church. As it says here, some Protestant leaders set up their own church, which is called the Confessional Church. One of the leaders of that is Martin Niemöller. And in that confessional church, there was some vocal anti-Nazi preaching. They weren't always anti-Nazi. They weren't set up as an opposition group, but they were set up in efforts to be independent from Nazi control. And many of their preachers, including Martin Niemöller, start to preach out against some Nazi ideas, some Nazi actions, particularly the violence and particularly treatment of Jewish people as the 1930s goes on. Final group then is young people. And we have examples like the Swing Kids, a group of young people, teenagers that just want to listen to music and dance and don't like Nazi control. So these groups are annoying for the Nazis. The Gestapo has a special group of people that are watching the young groups. They are annoyed by them. But ultimately, the youth are never going to pose a significant threat. So it is opposition. There's probably quite a lot of young people who don't like the Nazis. But in terms of were they ever an organized group of people that were able to convince large groups of other people that the Nazis were bad, well, that didn't really happen. So there was opposition. There was quite a lot of opposition in some ways, but they never were able to go anywhere near threatening the power of the Nazis. Okay, here are some questions to think about at the end of this video for chapter 2. What do you think was more important in allowing the Nazis to control Germany? Was it fear? Were people just scared? Or was it propaganda? Were people convinced that things were good, that the Nazis were the right people to be in charge of Germany? Linked to that, what do you think? Did most German people positively support the Nazis at this time? Were they happy with how life was going, pleased with the progress of Germany, and ultimately going along with the propaganda? You need to be able to think about what was so effective about the propaganda. Why did it work so well? You need to be able to analyze, articulate how effective opposition was. And then finally, you might want to think about how would you answer a question like this? Why was there not more opposition?